This week on The Wheelhouse. Frozen federal funding, nonprofits in limbo, and a child care system on the brink. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Governor Ned Lamont's got a plan for universal pre-K. Later in the hour, Connecticut Public state government reporter Michaela Savitt. She's going to join me to talk about how the plan stacks up. But first, President Donald Trump issued an order that froze trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans a week back. And while the freeze has since been rescinded, some nonprofit organizations are still unable to access funds. Nonprofit organizations across the state and country are scrambling to understand when and if they will regain financial support from the government. With me this hour, David Fahrenthold, investigative reporter for the New York Times. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Also with us, Alex Putterman, reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media Group. Alex, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Frankie.
Great to see you. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. David, I'm going to throw the first question at you here. The Trump administration briefly froze all federal grant spending, but then backtracked and rescinded the order. Why was this order given in the first place, at least as far as we know?
Well, what they said was they wanted to pause all spending, all outgoing grants, and to figure out which of the grants violated the president's executive orders. Remember, at the time, the president had put out this sort of slew of executive orders that were kind of vague, but obviously quite ambitious. And so there was the sense that maybe there were a lot of grants out there that violated what those were, but they needed time to figure that out. In the meantime, they didn't want to spend one more dollar. As it turned out, that was sort of legally a stupid strategy. But it's the approach that they've taken is still continuing. The review they started is still continuing.
Nonprofit organizations not the only targets of federal funding freezes, but they are uniquely vulnerable. So why is that?
Well, I think people have this sense that it's unusual for a nonprofit to get money from the federal government. In fact, about 35,000 U.S. nonprofits get more than half of their funding from government. And that's not charity in the sense that like the government just giving them money and saying, hey, do whatever with it. These are basically contractors. The nonprofits are like a for-profit in this sense. They're being hired to do a job. And the way the contracts usually work is it's not like a lottery win or like a game show win where they give you all your money right up front. It's like a sort of endless series of expense reports. So if I'm a nonprofit that's building trails in the forest, I go out there, build my trails, spend the money, then I come to the U.S. government and say, hey, look, I spent $3,500 last week. I need to get the money out of my grant to reimburse myself. So you can see the problem here. A lot of these nonprofits that are out there doing the work continues, and they have a week or a month or more of backed up bills that they have been told to expect to be reimbursed for. And now all of a sudden they can't be. So they're just holding this huge amount of debt or unpaid bills on their own balance sheet.
And that's kind of what they're struggling with and reeling because of that uncertainty, I would imagine.
That's right. I mean, these were people, these were not donations. These were contracts. They'd signed contracts with the federal government and they said, okay, well, you're going to do this work and we're going to pay you. And now all of a sudden, without explanation, the money just stops flowing. And so these groups, because they don't get all their money up front, they don't have a huge financial cushion to absorb that. So they were talking about laying off people, cutting back services, doing less of the work they do because they were running out of money very fast.
Alex, I want to bring you in here to talk about the local impact of Trump's actions on nonprofit organizations and if they're feeling it at the state level here. Are you seeing this locally?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest impact, I think, was just the absolute chaos, particularly of that first day when they announced this policy. Every nonprofit person in Connecticut I talked to described the same thing, just frantic texts and calls and trying to get in touch with their elected representatives and trying to get in touch with their staff and developing contingency plans. If our money goes away, what do we do? I mean, who do we furlough or fire and when? Just really chaotic in some of the cases, as David alluded to, the portals where they access their funding were down, so that only caused more panic. I think once the Trump administration rescinded that policy the following day, everybody could sort of take a deep breath, but there's still this sort of looming specter of what's going to happen next that has everybody a little bit nervous. In some cases, such as IRIS, the refugee resettlement group, the Trump administration's policies have already made a big difference. They had to lay off 20% of their staff and could potentially cut even further. So there have definitely been some pretty noticeable impacts in Connecticut so far.
Very happy that you brought up IRIS and the work that they do, because we're going to hear from Maggie Mitchell-Salem a little bit later. Thank you for that foreshadowing, sort of. But David, I want to come back to you now to get a sense of whether or not this sounds familiar and tie it to kind of that national scope.
That's right. The things that people in Connecticut experience, that sort of chaos, the question about who they have to lay off, who they have to fire, that's happening everywhere. It's red states and blue states. It's all around the country. And the important thing to know is that, yes, the Trump administration pulled back the memo that froze the funds just a couple of days after they put it out. Then there's been a couple of judges that came out and said, just for sure, that was an illegal approach. You can't do that. Well, they said at least that they stopped it. But the problem is that the Trump administration has kept some funds frozen. Some of these nonprofits still haven't gotten their money back. And despite the end of the memo, despite the judge's rulings, and it appears that they may never get their money back. But a lot of them are still stuck in this limbo that I was talked about, which was, they don't know what happened to them. They don't know how long this is going to last. They don't know that this is a glitch or if this is just they've lost their money forever. And the people that they normally communicate with in the government, they're grant officers. When they call them, either those people have been fired or they've said, look, we don't know more than you do. We can't tell you anymore. Just wait and maybe something will happen.
I believe the story that you recently wrote in the Times is Trump's attempt to freeze grant funding leaves nonprofits reeling. And I want to point people to that story. There's a few personal stories in there. You took us to Pennsylvania and Vermont. Could you shed light on one or two of those stories, if you can, and just introduce us to the people that are being impacted?
Sure, there's so many of them. I'll tell you one of the ones that was one of the most striking ones to me actually was in Missouri. There was this school district that had ordered electric school buses under a program the Biden administration set up. They got a grant from the federal government, $9.5 million, to buy electric school buses. They bought American buses. They were made in North Carolina. They were slowed down by the hurricane last year, but they were being delivered. Finally, they were going to get here in the last week of January. And at that point, when Trump takes office, 21 of the buses they're almost within reach. They're 50 miles away at a distributor's lot in Illinois. And all of a sudden, they can't get the money. The money they were going to pull out, their grant money to use to finally make the final payments on the buses, is locked. So now they're stuck there. The buses are there. They're almost, they're so close they can touch them, but they can't use them. That kind of limbo that so many different organizations have been left in. Like, okay, well, are we ever going to get these buses? Are we never going to get them? Like, we have to start planning for a future where they never come in. That kind of uncertainty, you can see how it starts to really disrupt your planning for a long period of time.
Alex, there's concern about the status of funding and grants from the federal government, but funds also come from the state as well. Are nonprofits in Connecticut concerned that they won't get what they need out of the next biennium budget?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even if we leave aside everything that's happening at the federal government, assume that all the federal money will be the same, nonprofits in Connecticut are still concerned. They say that their funding in real dollars has decreased in recent years. Like many other institutions in Connecticut and across the country, they've relied heavily on money from the federal government, pandemic relief funds, from the American Rescue Plan Act. That money is now gone. So that has kind of left a hole in their budget. So the state might increase funding a little bit, but in the governor's budget, the state would not increase funding enough to cover all of that federal funding that has disappeared. So nonprofits are saying that even forget everything that's happening at the federal government, at the federal level, they are in danger of having to cut, having to scale back their services just based on what they're seeing in the governor's proposed state budget. And now there are still, several months of negotiations to go that could certainly be resolved. I mean, usually the way this works is the governor stakes out a position and the nonprofits stake out a position, and there's ultimately some sort of middle ground. But to hear them, the Nonprofit Alliance, tell it, things are pretty dire for a lot of their members, and they're going to need more money from somewhere. And obviously, if federal money started to disappear, that would only exacerbate what they say is already a major problem.
So let's go there. The future and this uncertainty. It doesn't mean that just because you have uncertainty, you can't kind of move ahead. You have to provide these services. So, or at least you want to provide these services and be tied to your organization's mission. So, David, how does this uncertainty kind of impact that ability to plan for the future?
Well, it's really hard for people to even plan for the near future, for the next year. But I think that what we're starting to see come into focus from the Trump administration tells us that if you were a nonprofit that relied on funding from a couple of different sources, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, climate programs, DEI programs in the federal government, your money is probably not coming back. That money, they're going to do everything they can to try to shut it off. In some cases, they're going after nonprofits that already got money and trying to pull it back. There's large nonprofits that got huge amounts of money from the federal government under Biden to give away to greenhouse gas reduction projects. The EPA is now trying to use the criminal law to pull that back. So those nonprofits, many of which staffed up, built up the capacity because there was so much money coming out of the Biden administration, those places are going to have to make a really sharp cutback because that funding is not going to come back, I think, from the federal or the state level. So what we're going to see is this sort of class of nonprofits that have been used by the federal government to do kind of government work, to do work in lieu of the government, may really wither or have to find other missions and sources of funding.
I'm just trying to think about the totality here and the scope. So you're saying that there are definitely organizations that are already being told, like, that's not coming anyway near you. Do we know about the scope in terms of percentage? So, like, is it a smaller amount of organizations that are not going to be getting any of those funds coming back their way? Or are there some folks that are going to have sort of a financial thaw and then the freeze is going to, or excuse me, I think a better way to probably describe it would be like a hose. Like the hose is going to be, the faucet or whatever is going to be turned back on. Is there a larger percentage of those that are going to have the faucet turned back on, or is it a smaller percentage that are going to not have money coming back?
I think there's a concern that there will be a lot of people will lose their federal financial lifeline. That's because we're dealing with not just with Trump and the changes he wants to make, but also with Elon Musk and Doge. You know, those folks are trying to cut pockets of money wherever they can, and they're calling all kinds of things waste and fraud that are not waste and fraud. They're just things they disagree with. But, you know, the limiting factor in the first Trump administration on things like this was Trump's own attention span. He would be interested in this stuff, and then he would get distracted and go off to something else, and things wouldn't really change. Musk's attention span is something very different. I don't know how long his work at Doge is going to last, but as long as it does, he and his people are very focused, and they're cutting a lot of stuff. So I think that, you know, if you're a nonprofit that depends on federal grants for a lot of your income, you know, especially if it's anything adjacent to things that Trump and Musk don't like DEI, diversity, climate, you could really lose a huge portion of your funding. I think nonprofits that depend on federal funding at all, you know, even if it doesn't seem like it's going to be affected by this, need to realize how unreliable the federal government seems to be as a funding partner.
One thing I want to just underscore that David mentioned is that in Connecticut and elsewhere, nonprofits to a large extent sort of serve as the social safety net, or a large part of it. You know, like functions that the government isn't serving itself, it sort of offloads to nonprofits. So, you know, Food Share in Connecticut, you know, feeds the hungry, or, you know, homeless shelters. You know, you could imagine maybe an alternate world where the state or the federal government was more directly involved in that. But the way it works is they basically, you know, pay nonprofits to make sure that people aren't freezing every night during the winter in Connecticut. And if nonprofits, you know, go away or lose their funding, I mean, these are sort of services that go away. And I mean, it really, I think, can be a life or death situation in certain cases.
Life or death is a term that you just used, and that kind of underscores a grim outlook that David and you just painted, Alex, here. So I want to know if Connecticut's Governor Ned Lamont is offering any guidance to nonprofit organizations about how to proceed or maybe even how to survive.
Yeah, the governor's approach to the whole Trump administration has been sort of keep calm and carry on, whereas, you know, we've seen some other Democrats in Connecticut be a little bit more rah-rah. So we asked him that question, and he basically said, keep doing what you're doing. We'll deal with the problems as they come up. on that initial day when all funding appeared to be frozen, he did talk about dipping into reserves into the rainy day fund. I think that would be like a real worst case scenario. He would not, I don't think, be excited to do that. So for now, the message is keep doing what you're doing, and we'll see where it leads.
I got to ask you this, and tell me if you don't know the answer. That's fine. But and then if you can, David, bring this to any other governor that might be going through something similar. I think this is kind of a nuance that I want to dig into here, a political kind of thing. Could this be the governor either saying, obviously we have to deal with this as they come up, and maybe that could be a message to maybe an attorney general or something like that, to if they have to defend this in court, that could be one message. Or is this just more of a way to talk these things through so that, I don't know if it's massaging language or anything like that, but maybe it's a negotiating tactic if they have to negotiate with the Trump administration to kind of make sure that these funds eventually do, the faucet, I guess is the best analogy again, to make sure that these do get turned on at some point. Can you just help me with that nuance a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the strategy from what I can tell without too much inside info is that Lamont wants to kind of keep a low profile. He doesn't want to be the face of anti-Trump resistance. It's possible we have seen the Trump administration suing officials in New York. I think Connecticut's governor doesn't want that to be him, doesn't want that to be Connecticut. Attorney General William Tong has been sort of the more aggressive sort of attack dog type. I don't know to what extent Lamont and Tong are sort of coordinating that approach, but the way it has played out is Lamont has been kind of careful what he said publicly, seems like hesitant to really aggressively get on potentially Trump's bad side, whereas Tong has really been, all out lawsuits all the time, rhetorically and legally.
And as we finish this up, at least this segment, David, are you seeing something similar, or at least these kind of relationships play out outside of a place like Connecticut? Are you seeing other governors, other attorneys general kind of having to, I want to say, play politics? I don't know if it's or at least employ some kind of strategy, as there has to be some kind of response to what's happening at the federal level.
I think that's right. There's a really bifurcated response between Democratic attorneys, state attorneys general, who've been very aggressive and I'm fairly successful at suing the Trump administration in court, getting these policies blocked or delayed, and governors. I think that's partly because of the reasons you mentioned, that he has been targeting governors, meaning suing them over their immigration enforcement, but also trying to cut their funds. I think the governors are worried about selective funding that will help red states and not blue states. I think also governors, Democratic governors, see their opening as they don't want to seem to be hysterically or reflexively anti-Trump, but they want to swoop in when Trump's moves backfire. When it becomes clear when they think it will become clear that Trump is bad at governing and his cuts produce chaos and things that people don't like, they want to step in as the alternative to people who know how to make government work. And I think at this point, there's not much to gain by yelling about this stuff before we've seen this sort of real world impact and before real people see the impact.
This is tremendous perspective that Alex and David are offering us this hour, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you for answering that question. It kind of helps us in our mission to bring politics to the people and help people understand that nuance. So thank you so much. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You're obviously listening to Alex Putterman, reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media Group, and David Farenthold, investigative reporter for the New York Times. You can join the conversation. We want to hear from you, especially if you're impacted by a federal funding freeze. You got to give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. After the break, we're going to hear how organizations with mission statements that don't align with Trump's culturally conservative agenda are planning for the futures. This is The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public Radio. We'll be right back. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Nonprofit organizations across the state and country are in limbo following President Trump's order to freeze all federal grant spending. This freeze has since been rescinded, but the money isn't exactly flowing freely back into the coffers of the organizations that still rely on it, or maybe even at all. As reporter David Fairthold, the investigative reporter for the New York Times, and Alex Putterman, reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media Group, have kind of helped us understand this morning. You can join the conversation, particularly if you work for a nonprofit. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. David, in her first news conference as White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt defended President Trump's federal funding pause, saying that it would give the government time to weed out spending for woke gender issues and diversity programs that conflict with Trump's executive orders. Have nonprofit organizations with missions that don't align with Trump's agenda been impacted more heavily, you would say, at this time?
That's right, yes. And we're even seeing groups where their mission is sort of not related to either one of those things still being pressured to say, what's on your website? Okay, so your work is to, clear underbrush in Montana, but does your website say you support diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there's been a lot of pressure on groups that are even not dedicated to the purposes Trump doesn't like to make sure they sort of swear off any ancillary connections to them. So yes, it's particularly targeted at those groups.
This was in progressive media, so I just want to say that in an outlet that folks may say is more progressive, I want to say that. Is there really these emails going around, I would imagine, that, are asking people to, I don't know if it's snitch, but to try to help us understand whether or not, like you said, that organization that might be clearing brush in Montana is actually trying to do some undercover kind of woke stuff. Is this really happening at the federal level? Are Trump administration officials, are federal government employees trying to get people to snitch on people if they do this kind of work?
Well, there's certainly been an effort to get people to snitch within the federal government. It's one of the first things they did was to say, we're going to close all the government DEI offices, and we want you, federal government employee, to tell us if somebody is secretly doing DEI under some other name, or some DEI staffer has changed their bio so they can stay on. There were email addresses created for you to sort of snitch on your colleagues. But the more difficult thing for nonprofits is that some of them are getting these requests that say, we need you to certify that your grant is in keeping with the president's executive orders. And if it is, say yes. If it's not, then tell us how you're going to fix it or quit. And without a lot of guidance, it's not like they come to you and say, hey, your nonprofit's grant is out of compliance in XYZ ways. They're saying, well, you tell us. You look at and you decide, whether your grant is violating that. And if you get it wrong, if you interpret it one way and they interpret it another, you could be putting your grant at risk. So these are high-stakes conversations for folks even talking about their own organizations.
Alex, are you hearing similar stories from local organizations where they're trying to figure out how to kind of wade through this mess? Or I guess, alternatively, have you heard from any? Yeah, go ahead. Maybe somebody doubling down and trying to double down on their commitment.
Definitely. I mean, there are organizations that I think, like David said, everybody is just kind of trying to figure out what DEI means to the Trump administration and whether you have groups that deal a lot with marginalized communities, and is that inherently DEI in the view of the Trump administration? But then you also have organizations that are very proud and open that they do DEI or something similar to it. Community Partners in Action is an organization statewide, including in the Hartford area, that provides a lot of reentry services to people getting out of jail and prison, which, in itself is not, I don't think, a particularly political or controversial mission, but there's a tab right there on their website. I'm looking at it right now that says Our DEI Journey. It's right next to the About Us tab. It's very important to them. And I talked to the executive director there, Beth Hines, and she said, exactly, Beth Hines. And she said, this is important to us. We're going to keep doing this. We're not going to, even if they're going to say that tab on our website is going to cost us our federal funding, this is part of their mission. They believe in it, and they want to continue to live by that kind of ethos.
Shout out to Beth Hines and Deborah Gallo over there at the Community Partners in Action. And just for further perspective, since we're on this, These are people that have recently been incarcerated that are coming out and are asking for help because either you have a situation where you might not have identification, or you might not have access to a job, or somebody may be looking at your record or something like that. And this organization is helping people, particularly as they did a few years ago when there was a fire at a place that they were living in. They're just helping them with basic needs, essentially. So I think that really illustrates the kind of perspective that you guys are talking about, like what is woke at this point? What is maybe something that the Trump administration is looking at as DEI? We spoke with a different organization here, and Alex alluded to it earlier. Maggie Mitchell-Salem, executive director of IRIS, a nonprofit located in Connecticut. IRIS stands for Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services. They help refugees and other displaced people navigate the resettlement process, including securing housing, employment, and more. Maggie said IRIS has taken extensive hits in the past few weeks. Here she is explaining which executive orders have had the most profound impact.
One impacted those that had arrived in the last 90 days. This is the most intense period of support, both human and financial, that we offer to refugees, only refugees who are newly arrived. And the other was for the Welcome Corps program, which actually people in Connecticut helped inspire because of work they did from 2014 to 2017, resettling Syrians and other refugees. And so that Welcome Corps program also had a stop work order, and all work on that stopped at 5 p.m. and our team was let go at 6 p.m. on Friday the 24th. For the first 90 days, that reception and placement program, we are continuing to provide the support to those that have arrived while downsizing our staffing and drawing on private resources to provide what we had anticipated as several $1 million in federal resources we're going to do.
IRIS has downsized their staff. They're asking for more support from donors. Again, it sounds like a rough couple of weeks for IRIS and Maggie Mitchell-Salem. Can you just respond to what we're hearing, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think the refugee resettlement, talk about an area that doesn't really comport with the Trump administration's priorities. It's probably not surprising to anyone listening that would be sort of one of the first organizations or types of organizations that took some hits in the Trump administration. I think that's the beginning. I think it's important to remember also that not every nonprofit that we're talking about has really mission that is really in any way political. Not that IRIS is inherently political, but I mean, we're talking about soup kitchens, we're talking about homeless shelters. It's hitting everybody, and IRIS, I think, is sort of like right there on the front lines as an organization that does something that the Trump administration specifically doesn't particularly value.
I get what you're saying, Alex, because it's almost like even if you don't see yourself as political, right now perception is reality for the Trump administration. Nathan from Old Saybrook is a caller that is going to join us on the Wheelhouse at this moment. Can't wait to hear from you, Nathan. Thank you for calling in.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my call. I am a member of the Alliance for Nonprofits, and I work for a wonderful organization in Middletown called Gilead Community Services. We are funded by the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and the Department of Children and Families, and we do receive federal funding to those organizations for our work. There is going to be a legislative presentation by the Alliance in a few days at the legislature. We're only asking for a cost of living increase. However, I salute the Attorney General's activism, and I would hope that Governor Lamont would follow his lead and become more of an activist to protect the state. He has a $12.8 million surplus in Connecticut, the largest per capita in the country. And this would be a perfect time for him to become more of an activist in support of state services. And thank you so much for listening to the Alliance.
Nathan, thank you so much for calling in. I'm going to kind of not necessarily pivot, but I think I can sense some frustration in Nathan's voice, at least from the perspective that you have William Tong, who is more of in a position of action and is able to have these go to court, for instance, and file lawsuits and what have you. But the legislative process obviously works slowly. So, Alex, I would imagine Governor Lamont and William Tong are on the same page. It's just that the way that the governor has to kind of get to this reality is a little bit of a slower means, and they have to negotiate this in a budget. Or does the governor not at all want to use any of this kind of money to support these groups? Help us tear it apart that way.
Yeah, I can't, speak to what's inside the governor's head, obviously.
Yes.
I do think, the Trump stuff and the budget stuff are, it sounds like Nathan has sort of two distinct, maybe critiques or frustrations with the governor. On the budget stuff, Lamont is always a little bit more conservative. He would rather put away a dollar than spend a dollar, at least at the margins. This is, for years now, been kind of the push and pull between him and fellow Democrats. And it's the case again this year, where a lot of Democrats, a lot of advocates, nonprofits, education people would like to see a little bit more spending. The governor favors more saving. We'll see where they wind up this spring.
Politico recently reported that organizations tackling anything bolstered by the Inflation Reduction Act, a Biden initiative, David, you talked about this in the last segment, are experiencing withholding of funding as well. So, as I understand it, that money's not coming back. And if you can just, again, kind of underscore what Alex is talking about here on the local level, we're going to have to imagine that state governments are going to have to get involved because federal money is not coming in this way, at least for the folks that are really impacted here on the Biden initiatives here, like the Inflation Reduction Act.
That's right. A lot of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of what it did was give money out to people so they could do things. And what the Trump administration is doing is the money that hasn't gone out the door yet, they're trying to hold on to it. And now, in many cases, they're within their rights there. And many of these contracts have a clause saying the government can just terminate it, what they call for convenience. So they could cancel the contract as long as you make you whole up until the day they cancel it. They can cancel it for any reason. The good news and the good news for nonprofits is a lot of this money was new money. This was stuff that was coming out, a flood of new money that was relatively recent. So it's not like this is something you would have built your organization around for 10 years that's suddenly gone. The bad news is that the ones that got it, this was a huge windfall for them, but it also required them to hire a bunch of people, get new facilities, build new capacity. And now, just as they're starting to use that capacity, the money disappears. So if they grew rapidly, they may have to shrink rapidly. I don't think that states will step in to fill all the capacity that they were going to get under the Biden administration, but there will probably be some support for them to sort of maintain the state they were at in 2022 or 2023.
So then we should be looking in the coming months, David, to, you would say, state legislatures or maybe Congress to kind of argue on spending bills. Should we look to the courts? Where should we be naturally looking next?
Well, I think there's two places to look. One is at the way that members of Congress and governors, particularly from red states, but also from blue states, play in helping turn money back on that had been turned off. There are people out there who will say, we were it's already happening in some red states. We were relying on the money from the federal government to build this new natural gas plant, and it's half built. We need the rest of the money to keep building. And I think those people will get their requests granted, probably in the degree of closeness they are to President Trump. It's a way for him to sort of grant favors to people he likes. The other thing that I think is more interesting long-term, just thinking about the political angle, is remember that Trump's first term, as disruptive as it seemed for people like me who were in Washington, covering Washington, and the rest of the country, not that much changed. There was a lot of bluster and show here. A lot of the services people experienced, a lot of the everyday life was not that much affected. It didn't feel crazy if you lived in Montana or Arkansas or Connecticut. But this term is different. The stuff he's doing now is very different than we did in his first term, and it's going to turn off a lot of money and services and government interactions that people are used to. It's a lot more akin to what Elon Musk did at Twitter, which is turn everything off and then selectively, see what breaks and then start turning things back on. That's going to be a very different experience for people, even Trump voters. And what I want to see in the next few months is, does that disruption show up in people's lives in a way that they don't like? And does that moderate Trump's behavior? Does he start to change his behavior if it means that his voters experience some changes in their lives they don't like?
We just got, I believe this was a comment that came in from one of our listeners, Kyle from Woodbury. Thank you so much for reaching out to us, Kyle. I am a small farmer and I have a signed USDA contractor. I don't know where to move or go forward.
That's happening, especially in farms. That there's so many different farmer aid programs that came out under the Inflation Reduction Act, where farmers were told, okay, take this field and make it fallow, change this thing so you're protecting a riverbed better, and the government will pay you for the changes you make. The government will pay you for the land you take out of production. Those grants are also being cut off. So the idea that it's just cities or it's just blue states, it's not. A lot of farmers are very affected by this, and they are also sort of left in lurch, wondering like, well, am I just not going to get the money that I was told to expect? I already did my part of the deal. Now the government doesn't want to live up to its part of the deal.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to a fabulous conversation with David Fahrenthold, investigative reporter for the New York Times. David, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Folks should follow your reporting at the New York Times and obviously listen to The Daily, too. There's been some just incredible work that's being done to spotlight what's happening at the federal level, particularly with what you just talked about with the nonprofits and then federal workers who have just lost their jobs. I really value what you all do. Thank you so much for doing it. Thank you to Alex Putterman, reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media Group. Wonderful having you on the show. Keep doing what you're doing, Alex, particularly at the state level, and maybe you can address some of the concerns that Kyle and Nathan have had. Thank you so much for your work.
Thanks for having me as always, Frank. Take care.
After the break, we hear about Governor Lamont's plans for universal pre-K. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Joining me now, Michaela Savitt, state government reporter for Connecticut Public. Michaela, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you on. Folks, you want to join the conversation, 888-720-9677. Michaela, Governor Ned Lamont recently announced 2-year spending recommendations to Connecticut lawmakers. Fun, we're in budget season here in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell about this? What can you tell us about this new proposal that we are understanding now is for pre-K?
Yes, it's being called the Universal Preschool Endowment. It is $300 million being proposed, coming from last year's budget surplus. And with further investment coming from anticipated future surpluses, and the hope that it will expand and sustain Connecticut's childcare system in the long term. A system that is very strained right now and has been for a long time. And 10% of this balance can be used every year. And so $30 million could be used in this first year if the proposal passes. It would immediately make more childcare spaces available through Care for Kids, which is a program that pays for childcare costs for low to moderate income families. So essentially building on programming the state already has. And then it would also include community planning, ensuring that parents and other stakeholders, have a seat at the table and can talk with the administration, all across the state, from New London to New Haven to New Canaan, about what they want to see for improving childcare.
Do we know who this endowment will help directly?
Yeah, well, I would say it mainly strives to help two groups, parents and childcare workers. There are more households compared to the 1950s. I think now latest numbers from the Department of Labor were like 70% of households where both parents are working. And so, childcare is really a requirement for a lot of families across the nation. This is not just in Connecticut. And even before the pandemic, there was a childcare crisis. So, who does this help? It helps parents, but, women, particularly women of color, are especially impacted by the childcare crisis. And so, focusing on that parents part, the proposal includes that by 2028, preschool would be free of charge for families that make up to $100,000 a year. And then for families earning up to $150,000, it would be capped at $20 a day. I hear those numbers and I'm like, wow, like $100,000, like that's kind of not that much these days. And I did ask Commissioner Beth Bai, Office of the Early Childhood Commissioner Beth Bai, whether this would be universal, truly, regardless of income. And she said that will really depend on how the fund does over time. But, she has heard that concern.
Universal is a key word because for many people it might connote that like everybody's involved in this, the universe, right? And that everything is free. But as I understand it, doesn't mean free daycare for every child in Connecticut. I recently spoke to Ava Bermudez-Zimmerman, the Coalition Director for Child Care CT. Here's what she had to say.
Here in the state of Connecticut, the current plan is looking at capping the cost of care at 75% of what the cost really is. So that means that there is still some cost being incurred by the municipality, the center, or the parent.
There's also eligibility requirements like age that municipalities can also use to determine who gets available child care slots. Bermudez-Zimmerman and Child Care for Kids say they applaud the work that the governor and Office of Early Childhood Commissioner Beth Bai, who Michaela just name dropped, shout out to Beth Bai, are doing to expand access to child care here. They're looking for more, though, like a long-term solution that would make Connecticut more self-sufficient in case federal subsidies go away.
Right now, parents are spending nearly 30% of their annual income to pay for childcare, literally just everyday expenses. There's even parents taking out personal loans in order to pay for childcare. Working families just can't afford it. And that means that if they can't afford it, they're out of the workforce, they're not there, they're not taking promotions, and it's just impacting the whole economy.
So you spoke to Beth Bai, and you're hearing from stakeholders, but are you hearing from advocates as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, their reactions were, overall very excited. And I spoke to Ava shortly after the budget's address. A number of them were very excited to see this big investment in the childcare industry in Connecticut. And the investment in childcare workers is really crucial here because that is the root of the issue, right? It's workers are not being paid enough, so there are not enough people in the workforce to safely meet demand in these, childcare facilities and classrooms. And so getting people into the industry and staying there is really important. So, and that's why the state's plan is a long-term one. So, they would draw from the endowment and increase provider pay to be on par with kindergarten teachers instead of the rate that workers see now, which is about 75% of what kindergarten teachers make. That shift would also come in 2028. So, there's some long-term planning to do, right? Like they want to hear from the community. They don't want to spend the money too fast like some other states have. So, cost of living is high. Workers are saying they need relief now. There's bills in the legislature that are also addressing the childcare crisis and specifically the pay parity issue. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. And then there were also some other mixed reactions in terms of what age groups weren't included in this proposal.
So I want to go about it this way. It seems like there's a lot of focus on pre-K. Is there the sense that, but you also talked about the investment component of it. Is there a sense that this really gets to the heart of the issue? This bill, if passed, obviously, too, or at least if it's incorporated in the budget?
Well, I think the Lamont administration has emphasized that this is a starting point. And, Beth Bai told me that, they started with universal pre-K because that structure was already there, but also acknowledges, the concerns are really valid from advocates who are like, but what about birth to 3? And also that's typically a more expensive part of the childcare industry. So, again, advocates were really happy to see the proposed down payment, but, after the proposal came out, they're saying, are there ways to look at it, expand on it, help families with children under 3? And, Commissioner Bai told me this week that it's not out of the, it's not out of the picture, but it's down the road. Once the trust fund is in place, they're drawing on that, paying at the market rate for preschool. That would free up millions of dollars in the Care for Kids funds because the trust fund is filling in for the preschool rates. And then those funds would become available for infant, toddler certificates, after school certificates, or whatever the families need. So again, an emphasis on the long-term plan here.
Thank you so much for outlining this. You got any kind of final thoughts or anything else we should be paying attention to? Obviously, this has to be legislated. Anything else?
Yeah. I mean, and we're also in the long session, so there's a number of months ahead.
Oh. Yeah, it's what day is today? Today's February 19th, so that means that in a week or in the next couple of weeks, your job kind of becomes some public hearings and maybe something like that. So yeah. I'm just saying this is long because then you have June, so we're still 3 or 4 months away to when this all could be decided. Yeah,
and like I said, there's a number of bills addressing the childhood sector in the legislature right now, and addressing just the economy and families. So it's not there are legislators that are really pushing to try and help Connecticut families. And in 2025, our system has evolved that this problem has landed on childcare workers that that government hasn't supported this workforce and building it out. So it's a long-term thing, and I think we'll have to watch the process and see how it unfolds.
Something people should watch is your reporting that is available at ctpublic.org. Find Michaela Savitt on the web there. You'll find some stories about climate resiliency. You'll also find efforts. I think you just spoke to Jillian Gilchrist about lawmakers trying to find some money to support people going through endometriosis. And obviously this reporting you've done here on the child care sector. Thank you so much, Michaela.
Thank you, Frankie.
So great to have you. Today's show was a great one. It was produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.
Connecticut Public Radio's news reports are made possible by Pompey College of Business.